What is the power of this idea that it protects and it stops farmland and people who are trying to survive? The Orthodox Tewahido Church is so vital to Ethiopian identity.
What is something that is extraordinarily unique to Ethiopia?
What isn't unique? Feels everything's unique in Ethiopia.
Humble.
Yeah, I'm indebted to Ethiopia. I've learned so much.
Meticulous.
I saw these beautiful little gems on the landscape with the circular Tewahido Orthodox Church. And I was like, this is amazing, you know?
Hungry.
But I'm desperate to come. I really am desperate to come back.
Impactful.
First of all, Ethiopia will benefit from these.
A picture is worth 1,000 words. That's what you are reminded whenever you look at the photographs of Kieran Dodds.
My name's Kieran Dodds and I'm a photographer based in Edinburgh. My personal work looks at the interplay of environment and culture, and in particular, the role of ideas in shaping landscapes in the time of ecological crisis.
His award-winning photographs took the Ethiopian story to the world. Ethiopia's church forests.
There's still a great challenge to protect it. And that's why I'm happy to speak about it or to exhibit last month in Yale.
Kieran Dodds, through his photographs, brought to light the value of religious belief in conservation practices in Ethiopia and worldwide.
I do feel like Ethiopia can teach the wider world how to apply that.
Hello and welcome. Ethiopia, particularly the northern part of the country, had lost its virgin forests to farmlands, which have been expanding, infiltrating into every valley, hill and plateau. The last patches of forests are found in the yards of Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahido Churches. Even these aren't safe as people are desperate to survive and they depend on nature. To protect and conserve the last patches of forests, people like Dr. Alemaye Wassie and Dr. Meg Lowman have been working with church fathers and the local communities. Others, like Kieran Dodds, are working hard to raise awareness about Ethiopia's church forests to the international community. The award-winning Scottish photographer Kieran Dodds has taken the Ethiopian story to the world through his photographs. Has been consistently exhibiting, speaking about Ethiopia's church forests, the most recent one in Yale University. Today, he joins me from Scotland, Edinburgh, to talk about the work he's doing in relation to the conservation of Ethiopia's church forests. You're watching Messenger from Amhara Media Corporation. I'm Johannes Lijalem. Stay tuned.
I'm delighted to have you here on this program.
Thank you for having me.
5 years ago, your photographs that you have taken in Amhara region around Lake Tana were taking the spotlight of world photography, we can say. So what inspired you to come here in Ethiopia and take those photographs?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's many things brought me to Ethiopia. I mean, they call it the land of origins for good reason. A lot of different stories intersect there. And for me, I think I've been looking for Eden all my life in many ways. I've got a real passion for the environment and for the human place within the environment. And so since I studied zoology at university, I've always been asking the question, where do people fit into this picture? Because you see all these documentaries about like nature, like David Attenborough documentaries, and you think these are beautiful, but where do humans fit into this? I always saw stories of humans exploiting the environment. And I've been searching for that all my life, so to speak. And I think the story of Eden is always a beautiful one where you have humans and nature in balance. And yet there is that break in relationship. So that in one way is my motivation for all the work I do. I'm trying to find this harmony. But why I came to Ethiopia specifically relates to, I suppose, a search going through many countries, doing different stories. And the one I did before Ethiopia was in Tibet, in the highlands of China. And it was there I was following Tibetan nomads who were preserving the landscape. And yet industry downstream had damaged the landscape. And so then they were getting moved off. So I was looking at this and thinking, wow, this industrial revolution in China is damaging the environment. That is bearing the cost. And then a friend who was working in Ethiopia, a British friend, said to me, you know, come to Ethiopia. It's an exciting country. A lot is happening. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. But then I had a job. I had to work in Malawi. And so I was traveling through Addis, the airport, and the buzz was incredible. I thought, he's right. Something is going on here. And so I researched it and saw this industrial revolution again, this boom in the economy, the excitement of in the art scene as well. Lots of good things happening. And as a bit of an environmentalist, I felt that sense of doom. I thought, where's the environment bearing the cost? You always think like, where's the cost of this gain? And yet, when I looked into it very quickly, I discovered the church forests in Amhara and the work of Dr. Alemaye Wassie. And I was amazed. Instantly, I saw these in his scientific papers, I saw these beautiful little gems on the landscape with the circular Tewahido Orthodox Church. And I was like, this is amazing, you know? It looks like a spaceship has literally landed and is emitting this life force. And in some ways, it is like that. It's extraterrestrial. It's from another world. And so instantly I was hooked, and I thought I need to go and document this, not just for the world where I live, predominantly in the West, but also for Ethiopia, because it was being lost. And I thought, actually, this is an Ethiopian story for the world. And together we need to protect these incredible places.
When you actually go to these churches, this Ethiopian Orthodox churches, what do you feel when you see the churches, the environment, the doves, the birds, and nature in general? How do you see the harmony? What do you feel?
Yes, the feeling of it. I think the first time I went was with Dr. Alemaye and Dr. Meg Lowman, and they took me in. And I think as a Scotsman, I don't do well in the heat. So we were outside and it was very hot and it was very dry and it was very quiet, actually, the sound. But as soon as you walked into the forest, it felt like I was passing into another realm. The air was filled with the sound of birds and monkeys and insects, and it was cool and fragrant. And then there was the murmur of chanting and people walking within the garden in the cool of the day. And it just felt incredible. It felt like this otherworldly moment. And I went back many, many times after that. I stayed for weeks on different trips. And every time I went in, there was a real sense of calm and peace and beauty as well. And I think I remember one divine liturgy near Bahardar, a church just beside the road, actually. And the noise of the trucks had vanished as you walked into the forest, and people were there. And it was that sense of people singing alongside nature, lifting their praise. And it really was something very special to me. I mean, I'm a Christian. I'm not an Orthodox Tewahido Christian, but I was very welcome, and people were always happy to explain what was going on. And I had a couple of friends who would interpret for me. And it was just very moving. And to see the world in a bigger way, it really helped me in my own faith.
Particularly, I was amazed by the photograph that you have taken. From that photograph, it is very clearly demarcated that what is inside the church and what's outside the church is clearly visible for everyone to see. So we can think back in time, the barren land, the farmland was as virgin forest as the one that was inside the church. So when you see that, what comes up in your mind?
For me as a photographer, that was a beautiful way of telling the story. And I went in January and February because it was the clearest example of the difference between the temporary farmland, because it does become green, as you know, but it was this permanent forest. I wanted to show that what is permanent and what passes away. And of course, there's something amazing. I think my first reaction is that it's amazing anything has endured. What is the power of this idea that it protects and it stops farmland and people who are trying to survive? You know, what is the power of belief that can stop people just farming more and trying to get more? So that was the first thing I thought was a positive, just incredible that these things had survived. The second thing was obviously there's a disconnect in the theology between the sacred and the secular, because often the people who are farming are the priests. But often the people who are farming don't realize that they're slowly encroaching on the landscape and getting rid of it. So that was why I was so encouraged by Dr. Alemaye's work, because when they have workshops with these priests, they feel shocked and ashamed that they have encroached on the church and that they're killing the trees. And so that's why they build these conservation walls. So I think that was my two reactions, is one of wonder that these things have survived, but also one of, I suppose, sadness and hope that they can expand that theology, this idea of the trees as the clothes of the church, beyond into their fields. How do you adapt this? How do you connect up these forest patches? So I think they're the two opposite reactions I have when I see them.
From preserving biodiversity as being a reserve bank for those biodiversity seeds, how do you explain the importance of these churches?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question, because I think in the West we've realized the damage we've done over the centuries. We had the Industrial Revolution a couple of hundred years ago, and so there's been time for that reaction and that to preserve and conserve and to build up a seed bank. Whereas you're right, in Ethiopia there isn't the same way of doing that. They've not had as long to collect, but I think there are good things happening there as well. There's I think that the importance has been realized, and I think because most of the world's biodiversity is near the equator, it's in the tropics where Ethiopia is. I think the number of species and species unknown to science that are in the forests is very high from what the research has shown already. So they're important locally, not just as places that harbor insects for pollination, that raise water tables, and give plants and food and allow people to farm in them. But they're also places that globally are very, very important, because we don't know what the species are. The species we do know that are there are important for science and biology and just the diversity of the world. And when I was speaking to Dr. Alemaye last month at Yale University, we're having an exhibition, I remember asking him about, the importance of them. And he said they're unique to Ethiopia. They're specific to that landscape. But because it's unique, that doesn't mean it's not important for the rest of the world, because biodiversity is universal. So they're a treasure for the whole world to benefit from. But actually, first of all, Ethiopia will benefit from these in the local communities, but also in the wider country. And that's my hope with doing this story, is to put it back in the hands of the Ethiopians to run with it, to do more research, to collect the seed bank, and to preserve and protect these landscapes.
Actually, you have done extensive research. You have met people on the ground. You have talked with priests. You go to also to Tana, to the monasteries there. So what was your reaction in their understanding of nature, in their understanding of the spiritual world that is subjective to them?
That was one key thing as well that seems unique in my experience in terms of a conservation environmental story, was that the people were already consciously thinking in their whole worldview that they are part of the system, that they are actually to look after the environmental system, because Eden had trees, so the churches must have trees. And so for me, that was a great encouragement. That seems quite unique, because I'd been to lots of different places in the world. In Malawi, as a student, I was on this mountain, and that was one of the first issues we encountered. People there were living to survive, and they were taking what they could from the landscape. There's no fence to protect it. And so they did that. Whereas here in Ethiopia, you've got no fences, and yet people are protecting it and have done for centuries in the midst of conflict as well, in the midst of poverty and famine. Yet these things survive. So that for me is amazing. And so when there is a problem, which there is, that they are declining, as soon as you teach the people, you remind them what their worldview is, they're like, we must do something about this. And they're very motivated. So I think that is the incredible thing is that there's this, I suppose you'd call it a latent belief. It is there. Many people think of it consciously, but I think they need to be reminded. We all need reminded. We all forget. We need to be reminded. They need to be reminded how important the forest preservation is in the theology. And then they will just run with it and do what they can to protect it. But there's a combination of theology and science that can work together here, local and national, that can come together to preserve this landscape now.
particular picture that sticks with my mind is a picture that you take in the island of Lake Tana. What do you think of Lake Tana? Do you think the world recognizes the importance of this lake?
The Lake Tana is the source, and the church forests are preserving that landscape. So I don't think people know. Even I didn't realize quite how important that was. I knew it was a source of the Blue Nile, but didn't realize the value of that watershed. And so I think, yeah, I think when people realize that, they will want to protect the forest more because they see the geographical, hydrological, and political importance of forests to protect and preserve this landscape. Because I think that highlights as well a challenge with the church forests is people would much prefer to plant a new tree and have their photo taken than to preserve an old tree, which is far more valuable in protecting a landscape. So church forests are old forests you need to protect, whereas it's good to plant a tree, the right tree. But I think that is a real challenge to perhaps politicians to be able to recognize the value of protecting the old things, because you wouldn't have you wouldn't have a tree a small seedling to run a landscape, and you want a big tree to run a landscape in the way you want an adult to run a government rather than a child. So I think the importance of the valuing of these places takes a bit of work, and I think seeing the importance of it geographically and politically is a start, but then they have to progress and see the importance of the forest in and of themselves to the local communities.
You have brought the Ethiopian story to the world, and I have seen your works have been reported by the BBC, The Guardian, and a lot of other international media organizations. And this isn't a simple thing. This is an extraordinary public relation work for Ethiopia. Do you think the world recognized the importance of religion and environmental protection, particularly in the case of Ethiopia and Ethiopian Orthodox Church?
Yeah, I think two things there. One, any recognition of the story, I feel, is because of the strength of the story. And if I've been able to hold up a lens to it and to be able to let the story speak, that is what we're seeing if it is gaining an audience. I feel thankful that it has gained an audience. But in a way, I'm also frustrated because what change has come. That's why I've kept on and on about this to people, because there's still a great challenge to protect it. And that's why I'm happy to speak about it or to exhibit last month in Yale. It was on just now in Yale. So that's why I continue to speak about it and champion the work of Dr. Alemaye, because of the 35,000 churches, they think only 70 are preserved. So there's a huge work there. But your second point about religion, I think you're right. It's so vital to the environmental preservation of the world. And it's something which is a blind spot generally in the West, because it's very secular. We see ourselves now as post-Christian. And yet the environmental movement arose from Christian roots. So in the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution was happening, there was a counter reaction to that, which was to preserve the forests first of all, in public parks for people to escape and to commune with God, and then in the national park system, although that's secularized as well. So I feel like these spiritual ideas are what have created sustainable landscapes today in the Christian world, but also in other parts of the world through Buddhism or Hinduism, perhaps in other places. But I do think it's a particularly powerful idea in the Christian world, and that's the biggest world religion. So I do feel like Ethiopia can teach the wider world how to apply that. And while not everyone is Tewahido Orthodox, I think it's actually something that brings together the church fathers, the roots of Christianity. We have this kind of common view. It's the same theology at the root of human beings in Eden that unites all these different sects and denominations. I think this allows people to see the common root that they share and the bigger picture, in a sense, of where humans fit into the earth. So I do think it's a story which intersects lots of different places for me and things of interest. But again, it's a story I want to place back into the hands of Ethiopians to run with it and see where they can take it.
There have been a lot of coverage by the international media about famine, about war, about migration, and so on, the darker sides of affairs here in this part of the world. and we do not deny those things didn't happen.
Yeah.
And we can't turn our eyes from that. And the thing is, when people hear about Ethiopia, the thing that comes to their mind is there civil war, or is there famine, or something like that.
Yeah.
What about the other aspect of Ethiopia? Do you think the world is deprived of the best things it can get from Ethiopia by those coverages of war, famine, and other things? Of course, they should get attention too.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. It is denied the hearing it should have. I think still in the West here, when I speak of Ethiopia, that is the picture in people's minds, decades old of the famine. And then I suppose today the stories you would hear, by the nature of news, it fixates on the dramatic. So you'd hear about conflict. And I think that's partly again why I find it I'm motivated by this, because the church forests are continuing to exist because of the work, the everyday work of people on the landscape, going about planting a tree, watering a tree, farming the landscape, building a wall to protect it. So I think that actually is a general point about the difference between social media and news and daily life. I feel there's a real rise in anxiety and sadness in the West, especially among younger generations. They have sort of ecological stress. They're worried about the future, and I think that's because they're permanently fed a doom scroll news that is depressing. And I always say the antidote to scrolling on your phone and feeling depressed is to stroll, is to walk through the street, to see people, to speak to them, to go to a wedding, to speak to a child, to like have a coffee with friends. I mean, that is the balance of life. And I think what I love about showing this work is, again, you're showing that side of life. Although everything happens within it, you've got life and birth and death and everything happening in these forests. It's a place where people come to remember why they exist. So I think you're right. There's a need to remember daily life as you stroll down the street, and I hope people look at this and see Ethiopia in a new light. And I also hope Ethiopians are able to, when they think with pride about their country, and they think about stone churches, which obviously people come from around the world to see. I do hope in the next few years people will come to see the green churches, and they'll know about the church forest, and they'll come just for that.
You have been to a lot of places. You have visited African countries. You have been to Asia. So, what is something that is extraordinarily unique to Ethiopia in your observation, in your trip?
What isn't unique? Feels everything's unique in Ethiopia. You know, I think it's a country that's very special in my heart. I think I've come away with friends from there. I've had friends visit me here and stay. And when I was in America last month with the Ethiopian guys, we had a band of chanters who were showing the people what the music and sound of the church forest is like. And it was just so nice hanging out with them and speaking. So I think Ethiopia's uniqueness is quite hard to pin down, but I do think that the Orthodox Tewahido Church is so vital to Ethiopian identity. In a sense, that's what's allowed it to endure for centuries with the huge changes around it. And although the country now is very diverse in people groups and also religion as well, I do think that is something very unique about it. We talk about the land of origins all the time, well, the tourist board do. And I do think that there's that real sense of the start of things being there, and Ethiopians knowing it, that they are the origin of so many things. The ideas of Eden, the ideas of the biblical ideas, being part of that story is very important, but also historically through geological time, sorry. It's just very, very unique in that respect.
When are you going to come back and to look at Ethiopia and to take pictures again?
Oh, I want to come back. I'm always trying to come back, but the last few years, there's been so many dramas at home, internationally, and where you are as well. So it's been very challenging. And I'm an independent photographer, so I'm self-employed. So I've always got to justify these things. But I'm desperate to come. I really am desperate to come back because, and again, I feel like what's the best use of my time and resources? Is it to come come there and to take more pictures, or is it to sort of speak about it to a wider world? And of course, I would be there in seconds, given half a chance. So yeah, I hope to be there soon. We can have a coffee.
Kieran Dodds, your cameras, your works are highly valued, respected around the world, and we Ethiopians are indebted to you because you have told our story, somewhat a hidden story that we have been just striving to give the world to. So, is there anything that you would like to say?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm indebted to Ethiopia. I've learned so much, and I've been so blessed by my friends there, and just learning about the deep history of that land and the people, and the modern history too. So I'm thankful to Ethiopia.
Kieran Dodds, thank you for your time, for joining us and giving us your perspective on this program.
Thank you.
To protect, conserve Ethiopia's church forests, people like Dr. Meg Lowman and Kieran Dodds have traveled all the way from Europe to Africa, Ethiopia. At the end of the day, it's up to us Ethiopians to wake up, protect, conserve, and expand Ethiopia's church forests, which are found next door. After all, these are the places where most of us got our first baptism, and most of us would get our last dwelling place when we are dead and buried. I hope you are inspired by the works of Kieran Dodds, and thank you for staying with us.